So the ministry that my husband and I run, alongside a host of other people, is the Carriers of Hope ministry. So Carriers of Hope provides free caskets for children that are lost through miscarriage or stillbirth and up to 1 year of infant death. And so it provides free caskets. We work with women's hospitals and a few other hospitals. And these caskets are actually designed to be used at the Children of God Mausoleum at St. George. And Crystal Newport and Father Paul Yee there have been, just amazing saints in all that we've done. But they're designed for that mausoleum. There's 3 different casket sizes, depending on the gestation of the baby that's been lost. But they also can be used by people outside of that mausoleum. So if there's a private cemetery or a church cemetery or, any of those places, anywhere that will accept it, we donate them free of charge. Carriers of Hope was an accidental ministry. It's definitely not something that we thought we would ever do. I think that's how God does most things. It was really, I say accidental, but it really was a lot of providence. I just heard today someone say, "Show me your misery and I'll show you your ministry." So for my husband and I, we have 9 children. We have 5 here on earth and 4 in heaven. We, in 2016, lost our son, John Benedict, at 14 weeks. We knew we wanted to bury his body, and have a memorial mass for him, a funeral mass for an unbaptized baby, actually. But there was no resources. We felt like when we asked, no one knew anything. We had no answers, even how we would get the remains. So St. Isidore offered us a half plot to bury him, but then we ended up at Hobby Lobby trying to find a box that would contain his body, and an appropriate, burial vessel for him. And then Father Brad Doyle and another friend tried to put together a box, and Norman Fauché just did this beautiful lid. And my husband, who was a woodworker, he wanted to do it, but he didn't want to do it for his own child. And Father Brad doesn't mind me sharing the story. The box was so poorly made, craftsmanship-wise, that it kind of forced my husband, again, unwillingly, but he knew he needed to build a casket around this beautiful top that Norman had painted, the Holy Name of Jesus. So we could have been denied John's remains because he was deceased before 20 weeks in the womb. The law changed that now there was a House bill that said you could receive remains before 20 weeks. You had access and they had to tell you. So this was happening, and then alongside that, we lost another baby at 19 weeks, Cecilia Hope, who the ministry is sort of named after. And so there we were again, building another casket, putting another baby in the same plot. And it was difficult because there weren't a lot of resources. There was no roadmap for this. My husband dug the grave and put our babies in and buried them. So it was really difficult. And then as that went on, priests kind of heard about this, and they would call us and they would say, "Can you build a casket?" And, we had 4 children and full-time jobs and ministries. So, God's providence was kind of wild, because someone came up to us and mentioned a grant for casket building. But the biggest issue was there was nowhere to bury. And there was a lot of laws with burial and crypts and plots and all these things. So our caskets that we were building could only be used in a small number of places. And those places, as this law changed, there was really no infrastructure for people to be allowed to do this. And there really has never been. I encounter women all the time who said, "I didn't know I could even do this," but wanted to. So thankfully, Bishop Duca and St. George agreed to raise the funds to build the Children of God Mausoleum. And then we had this grant, and now we have these amazing, a group of men and one woman in Florida who builds caskets, and they're all free of charge. And again, they can be used at this beautiful above ground mausoleum at St. George, or for any use. And there's actually a funeral home in Lafayette we donate to that charges nothing for burial. So, there's been a lot of work. There's still a lot of unknowns. Some hospitals interface with us better than others. Women's has our caskets on hand. And it's it's really different depending on when a family loses a baby. And so there's a lot of sort of minutia involved that we've had to kind of work through. And in the midst of this, we were doing this, and we ended up losing a third baby, Judith, Elise Rose. And, God was so faithful because we've been able to walk with people who we know the terrain, we know the map, we know the difficulty. And we've been able to tell them what you're feeling is normal, what you desire is normal. And one of the things I said to the bishop was, we believe in burying the dead. This is one of the corporal works of mercy. And we believe that life begins at conception, but there was a real disconnect. It was where our faith met reality of what are we doing with these babies, and how are we honoring them, and how are we allowing people to grieve properly, and within the beautiful gift of the sacraments of the church and the teachings of the church and the corporal works of mercy. Our ministry is called Carriers of Hope. And what I've always said is, when the mausoleum was built, which was so beautiful because, God's so faithful, we had walked through this, and I told my spiritual director, Father Paul, I don't want to be the patron saint of miscarriage. In fact, I don't think I will be, because at the time, I didn't know if I believed in God. We were going through so much, and we were doing this, and we just sort of baby steps, literally one foot in front of the other. But when we were blessed to have our miracle son, Jude, and he was born before the mausoleum opened. And as I stood there holding him, and our babies ended up being buried at St. George in in-ground plots, which is a whole crazy story how that happened, moving from St. Isidore. I realized that this mausoleum and the caskets, they're not a monument to death, it's a monument to life. We all want to know that the pain we experience, we're not alone in it, because the only thing worse than suffering is suffering alone. And so a lot of times with miscarriage, people don't know what to say. Sometimes they'll say things that aren't so great, like, you just try again, or look at the children you have. And so it doesn't acknowledge the loss and the pain. And so sometimes just acknowledging it is what gives people hope. And in a culture where we have so many, deaths of despair, abortion there's no hope here. We are saying no, this was a person, and this person's life is important, and the Lord sees this life, and we see not only your baby's life, but we see your pain. And so, St. Paul says hope is an anchor for the soul. And so when you think of an anchor, it goes into a place you can't see, and you're like, hope that holds on. And I like to think of it as hope as an anchor. You throw it up into heaven, right? And so we learn, our church teaches us that children lost in the womb, we entrust them to the mercy of God. And so this is a way to acknowledge their life and to entrust them to God. We return them back to the Father. I think about Mary at Jesus's ascension. And one time I was praying the Seven Sorrows Rosary, and I was curious as to why the ascension wasn't included, because I feel like for Our Lady, it would have been bittersweet. Her son was going back to the Father, back to, where he was meant to be. But for her, there was this letting go. And so I think this has become, for me, the mystery of miscarriage. I want my children here with me, but I know I have this amazing team in heaven. I've entrusted them to God's mercy, and that is my hope in God's mercy, and that God can be present. And this ministry allows us to be present to so many men and women who, when they say, I feel this and I feel that, and I feel bad that I feel this or that, we can say in a way that's very full, I understand. It's not an empty understanding. And I think that gives people hope, just to know I'm not alone. Someone else, to hear someone else say your baby's name is one of the greatest gifts. And then to acknowledge their life and acknowledge the loss can be also, and sometimes we shy away from that, but sometimes that's the place we need to press into. I've seen hope fostered in just every different person's story. I've also seen hope fostered, each family that we've helped, because this has been such a step-by-step process of discovering, policies and structures and laws and hospital rules and reading the law. But each baby that we have honored, each family that we have walked alongside, has been a piece in this. And so it's been very real to see these babies as intercessors along the way. Like their life is still, like the Lord's still using their life to bear witness to life and to bear witness to loss and grief. You know, God, anything that the Lord touches becomes holy. The chalice, you know, I'm not going to use it for my coffee. I'm not going to put my money in the tabernacle, because like Christ has touched that place and it's holy. And so I think we forget that Christ entered into death. And so it should be a holy, it should be a hopeful moment, even though difficult. But it has been real to see each family we've helped has unlocked just a different door and a different door and a different door. And it was difficult for us to, when we lost our daughter Judith, we couldn't bury her with John and Cecilia at St. Isidore. And my husband had joked that we would move them to St. George eventually. And I said, no, we're not doing that. But then we had to bury them together. And it's so real that it was right, because it's their life and their death that paved the way for this. And so there's many saints, you know, you think of Saint Therese, who was sort of unknown and unseen, but it was her life and her hope and her message. And I think that, you know, I know that even my children that I've lost have messages for me from the Lord. And that's been very, very real. And I've seen that with other women and other men. And it's just been beautiful to be a part of. You know, 1 in 4 women experience miscarriage, 1 in 4 families. And so to hear that people don't know about it, you know, I think there needs to be more education and more just, you know, people telling other people that this is available to them. And there's still a lot of work to be done just with the hospitals, but you know, again, it's baby steps, and it's one thing at a time. But it's been beautiful to watch what God's done. Also, the women, when I've given miscarriage talks on our website, we also have, just depending on when you lose your baby, because if it's at home or if it's in a hospital or if it's later on in pregnancy, it can be very different. So we sort of have those step-by-step things. But the other things I've encountered is when I've given my witness, sometimes I'll have older women who this was definitely not part of our understanding or teaching, or there was no resources to them. And so we even have resources for women, you know, who still want to honor their baby. And to see, you know, years and years and years can go by, but that the life of their baby is still very, very real to them. And it's very, the pain is still real. And just to have a place to like pour out that pain and to acknowledge that pain, and to have the church through this ministry and through the sacraments of the church meet that pain, like this is what we're meant for, is to be there. And that is what gives hope.